right before the break. Was not their best night of game action, but they were up for the challenge late, and Fox took over. Kings got the win. They're back in Denver tonight, just a couple of weeks removed from that game, as we head to Denver now and join our next guest here on the Folsom Lake Honda Hotline. We love to spend our Wednesdays with Kayte Christensen, Kings television analyst. Good morning, Kayte. How are you?
Good morning. I'm great. I just have to say, how about the brilliant genius of G-Man? He's just so fantastic. That was a great call.
He is. I mean, look, he's been doing this forever, but it doesn't mean like we have to acknowledge his greatness. He is great. I love that he still loves it.
Great.
And he's always on his game. We just hope the Kings can always be on their game like he is.
Yeah, and, this is a team that the Kings have played incredibly well against all season. They have the trio advantage on them, and, no matter how tonight's game goes, it's nice to have the tiebreaker. But, you look at this league and you look at teams, and it's crazy, how matchups kind of can be in favor of you. And a team like Denver, defending champs, and for them to have played them so well this year. And I think coming off of that Miami loss, there's a little extra incentive, to come in here and kind of take care of business in your conference.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, Kayte, because, look, I think some of the thought process would be, look, Denver's won the title. They're coming off the title. They're good. They have a better record than the Kings. They'll probably be angry, would be the thought, that the Kings have beaten them 3 times. But I hope the Kings have that same approach, because, look, they just lost a game that I respect Miami, the heck out of Miami, but the Kings had some advantages in that game that they didn't capitalize on. So I hope Sacramento is mad going into this game.
Yeah, I mean, they should be. It's crazy, I saw some comments online the other day. I just happened to look on the Kings. They've made a post, Domas with his kids, before that Miami game, and I mean, people calling for Mike Brown to be fired after that Miami loss. I just don't understand the absurdity of it. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but I'm like, wow, one game, that's the indication, huh? Like the reigning coach of the year and has turned this team around. And, I wish that they could win every game. And I think it's interesting how we look at teams and matchups and situations and look at it as like, oh, it's a must win. They have to win this one, but you have to play the 48 minutes, and you've got to give credit to Miami. And the one thing that I know about the Heat, which is just, more than any team in this league, and I'll say this hands down, they are so difficult in the sense that regardless of who they're missing, their culture is one that they're going to play the Miami way. And so everyone that steps on the floor is going to, come out there and they're going to play the exact way that culture demands. And they're, defensively a great team. And, the Kings mounted a massive comeback. They're down 20 to start the fourth quarter. And you're thinking this game is out of reach. And it wasn't. They were able to battle back, get close. And the reality is you get down by 20 in a game to anybody, and you have to mount that comeback. You spend so much energy to kind of mount it. It's like, do you have enough left in the tank? And second night of a back-to-back and all of these things. And obviously the Kings did not have enough to kind of get over that mountain. But, I look at it in this way, is like every single game is it's important, in the sense of you gain something out of it, right? There's the adversity to me this season that the Kings have been through have probably it's been the most valuable thing. You look back to last year and it just didn't seem like there was a ton of adversity that they had to fight through. They very healthy, they started out the season 0-4, and then they go off and they kind of find their footing, and they played well all year. And they just weren't faced with the same type of adversities that they have, throughout the course of this entire season. And I want to believe that is going to be a factor come postseason, that it's going to be a positive factor. And we'll have to see how it plays out. But yeah, I mean, disappointing loss, when you look at all the factors, but at the same time, it's like, what are they going to learn from it?
Yeah, and one thing I wondered about, and this may be the one thing I question about Mike Brown, and he questioned it himself, Kayte, in the postgame. He said, look, we went to that zone, and it was effective. And literally, the Kings don't do that a lot, and that's when the comeback started. He said, maybe I should have gone to that earlier. I guess my question, not even on that, is going forward now, they don't play a lot of that. Is this something you think they could utilize more, or did that just work more so based on like Miami's post-ups and kind of the way they attack the game?
I think it's a good question in the sense that, you don't see the Kings play a lot of zone defense. Because here's the detriment to playing a lot of zone defense. For whatever reason, a lot of times when teams play zone, it's they don't play as aggressively, right? Because you're playing in your areas. You've got you've got your little zone of the floor that you're like, oh, I'm responsible for this. But for a lot of teams, the physicality takes a step back. But I think the reason that it worked against Miami was just when you look at the personnel that they had out on the floor, the size, going to the zone against that smaller lineup was really impactful. They had a lot of problems guarding kind of some pick and roll action earlier in the game. And, you look at Bam and what he's able to do, and he was the main option offensively for them. And I just thought, like, when you get Bam in a high pick and roll, they had Domas in that drop, and they were just picking them apart. And then when they brought Domas up and they kind of had him at the level, then he was split, the ball handler was splitting the two defenders, and they were getting downhill. So that's why I think the zone kind of worked against them, because it took away those lanes for Miami. And maybe they could have gone to it sooner, but again, this is a team that doesn't play it a lot. And when I talk about learning things and losses, it's not just the players, it's the coaches too, right? And so that's something that, probably is going to, you look back at that Phoenix loss in Phoenix when the Kings were up in the fourth quarter and they went small and they just started picking the Kings apart, and they had Kevin Durant guarding Domantas Sabonis. And for whatever reason, they started to try and ISO and all of a sudden that's just not how the Kings play. So the next time they played, the Suns, they were ready for it. And it did not impact the game. It did not have the impact that it had in the first matchup. So, I think you look at this as like, okay, is this an example kind of like that Suns game, whatever it was, a month or so ago? I can't even keep track of what month we're in right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, it's curious. Will we see more zone defense? Because they actually did a great job. They did a great job of staying physical, wreaking havoc, lots of rotations and actions. And I thought that it looked really good. So we'll see. I don't know that playing zone against Denver would be as impactful, but again, it's just about what five guys the opposing team has out on the floor.
Yeah. I don't know if you know this, as we're talking with Kayte Christensen, Kings television analyst. There was some word yesterday about DeAaron being a little questionable, just a bit, everybody's banged up at this time of the year. Do you know of anything at this moment, whether or not we expect to see DeAaron tonight?
I don't know of anything. Technically, here in about 6 minutes, they've got a film session, and then they're going to go to shoot around. And a lot of times it comes down to kind of how they feel going through shoot around and then pregame warmups.
Yeah.
But one thing I have to say, and I have to give credit to these two stars specifically, Domantas Sabonis and DeAaron Fox, they don't miss games. I mean, DeAaron has missed, I think, 5 games total this season. And when you look at it across the board of other players of his caliber on other teams, that's just not the case. And so DeAaron has been playing through some shoulder issues and stuff for a while. Yes, he's banged up. But for him to miss a game, it would tell me that it's probably far past the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's something to be said about that, because you've played, there's different forms of leadership. And I think a lot of times too many people are guilty of seeing a coach yell and that coach is coaching, or a player that gets on his players, that guy's leading. Well, that is a way to do it. And it works for some people, some it doesn't. There also is ways by being there and accountable and productive. And to me, Kayte, that coming out of the break when Sabonis was listed as doubtful, and I mean, he was really sick, and I thought, well, he's probably not going to play tonight. Then you heard he went through the morning shoot around. He went from doubtful to questionable. And at that point, I'm like, oh, I think he's going to play. And that just, to me, had to show, from Herder to Len to pick anybody on the roster to Davion, wow, this is one of our best players, most important players. He knows this is an important push. He's playing tonight. And then he went and dominated too. That to me is leading and showing a statement too when you play like that.
Without a doubt. I mean, and then he went and had another triple double.
Oh, yes.
So it's just like, So here's the reality of the situation. 82 games, we all know, is a daunting season because this league is, I mean, it's just brutal. You know, it's brutal, the schedule, the travel, all of the things. And you look at Domas in particular, who probably takes the biggest beating night in and night out. And, you know, it's important for him to play. That morning when I was starting my prep work, you know, I checked the injury status in the morning and it said he was doubtful for an illness. And I was like, there's no way he's not playing. Like, even when I saw doubtful, I was like, there's no way he's not playing. And then, you know, then it updated to questionable. I'm like, yeah, he's absolutely playing. Like, I had no doubt in my mind, just because having been around him now for the last, you know, 2+ years, it's like you get to know a player's mentality, and his mentality is availability. And he battled, I mean, shoot, he played with a broken thumb all of last season, you know? So it's like, I don't doubt that he did not feel well. I don't doubt that he wasn't sick, but he is just made of the toughest stuff that he could possibly have. So it's important in that way. And to your point, Jason, leadership is showing like, hey, no excuses. Like, we're going to be out there on the floor and we're going to play to the best of our ability, regardless of whatever situation that given day, you know, how you feel, how your body feels. Like, you can't, the moment that you start, I mean, we've seen it, like Kawhi Leonard has been available most of this season.
Yeah.
You know, when we played him recently, I think he'd only missed like 5 games at that point. And you look at, it was the same with Paul George, who missed that game. Like, you look at the season before where everyone was like, oh, they're going to be, you know, a title contender. And then they're just not playing. They're out, you know. They each played, I think, around 50 games that entire season. And it's like, it shows how important availability is in terms of, you know, your team being able to reach their goals. And Domas is just, and DeAaron too. I mean, just, they're tough as nails, and they don't complain. They don't ever complain.
Yeah. You know, the team dynamic, Kayte, is always interesting to me. And I think personally, my observation, one of the strengths of this team is their love for one another, their bonding, the genuine, seemingly appreciate being around each other. And, you know, when you're on the road, you are really locked in together. And I don't know if that fits into their strength. And maybe I'm reading too much into this, but it feels like they've had some of their better games on the road. Is there something better than, you know, because of that unity, you're all together in Denver, there's nowhere else to go practice or film or eating together, whatever, and it just brings out the best of the Kings on the road? Is there something in that line of thinking right now with the Kings?
Yeah, to a certain degree. I mean, from my playing days, the most fun I had was when we were on the road, because you get to be around each other. When you're at home, you know, everyone has their lives, they have their families, they have their, responsibilities and that kind of thing. And so it does go a long way being on the road to be able to bond and kind of have that time with each other. And they genuinely enjoy being around each other. But here's the thing. I asked Mike Brown about it, you know, within the last week. I want to say maybe it was when we were last in Denver. Again, I can't remember what day today is. But I asked him about their performances on the road. And, you know, kind of not having as good of a home record as, you know, you would hope that they would have, especially playing in front of that crowd at Golden One. I mean, which hands down, not blowing purple smoke up your butt at all. It's the best in the league. Without a doubt, it's the best in the league. It's really, really impressive to have that kind of a home court advantage. And he just said, you know, there's something to knowing that when you're on the road, that you're going to have to fight through a ton of adversity, and that you have to muster a different type of performance, because you're battling against a lot of different factors, and they're not in your favor. And he praised his team for their ability to kind of do that on the road and to have that mentality. But he followed it up by basically saying, like, we have to figure out how to do the same thing at home, because how do you waste this crowd, this fan base, and the momentum that they can give you. And I think sometimes, you know, without knowing that you're doing it, you can relax a little bit mentally, and think that, okay, we have an advantage today. We're at home. But I mean, really that is all for naught. It doesn't really matter in the end. Like, you have to go out there and play with that same type of, you know, intensity. And so, you know, the Kings are about to have a nice chunk of games on the road, or I mean, rather at home.
Yeah.
So it's we'll see how that changes, and if they're able to really start to build some momentum. I was looking at it yesterday, standings and stuff, and I just happened to look at home court records and road records and that. And I'm sitting here going wow, we've played 5 more games on the road already than we have home games, and we're on a 2-game road trip. So by the time they get home, it's like they've played 7 more road games on the season than they have at home. And then you're going to start this homestand where you sprinkle in a trip to LA, and then you sprinkle in a 3-game road trip kind of in the middle of the month of March. But other than that, you're at home, and you have to start truly focusing on what do we have to do to be able to use the month of March to our advantage, because you look at the standings and it's just, it's brutal. The Western Conference is so brutal. Everyone is healthy for the most part. And the difference between 9th, 10th and first place is really not, it's not monumental, and you look at the Eastern Conference. And when I looked the other day, it was I think that Cleveland was 7.5 games in back of Boston, and they're second place in the East. Well, that's the difference between 9th and 10th in the West and first. It's not a big differential. So the Western Conference, and when people really look at wow, the Kings are not where they expect them to be. They were in 3rd place in the West around this time last season. Why are they not playing as well? Well, they are. They're actually playing better pace wise and looking at their record. But the difference is the Western Conference is way more healthy. Than it was a year ago. And that's where the difference is.
For sure. And the results are showing it. So tonight it's Denver. They've beaten them 3 times. We addressed that at the beginning, but they have not played Denver with their starting lineup. Looks like that group will be there tonight. So when they've got their 5, Kayte, they're as good as anybody. It obviously starts with Nikola Jokic. I was bringing up this thought earlier. I know there was a game maybe a couple years ago, you might remember at home, where I think the Kings' game plan was kind of let him have his night, let him go for a number, and I think he got 50, and they lost. He didn't have a big assist number. I don't think you ever want to let anybody get that comfortable, but the fact that he's like Sabonis, he can have 30 with also 15 assists. Where do you even start with a guy this gifted, this skilled, and how you defend him?
Oh my God, he is just a juggernaut, right? It's interesting you mentioned that about a couple years ago, because recently in a media availability, Mike Brown was kind of asked about by Bay Area media actually. I think it was they were asking basically, you obviously had that series against Denver when you were on the staff at Golden State, and you kind of took a different approach to it defensively. What is the difference now? Well, he out and out said, well, I was the defensive guy. It was my job to come up with the game plan. And the way I looked at it at that time was you're going to let him get his, but you got to make sure everyone else is completely locked down, because that's really where he's so good, is that he makes everyone else around him better. So if you're kind of making him feel like, okay, well, the best thing for me to do is actually score the ball right now instead of picking you apart. And it worked for them in that series. But then he followed it up and said, hey, Jordy is my defensive guy, and I trust him completely to make the decision on how we're going to game plan for Jokic and how we're going to do it. And it's a little bit different than it was then. And you also have to realize that was a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? You got to adjust. You can't ever have just one game plan against someone like him. I mean, he's a 2-time MVP for a reason. He is difficult, and you got to show him a lot of different things. And I think the Kings have done an actual, stellar job, in terms of their game planning for the entire team. Right. So we'll see what they kind of go with tonight. But, if history tells us, every game has a story of its own. And, it's crazy. I've watched a lot of Denver games this year, and there's games where it's Nikola Jokic might take one shot in the first half. And their people are like, what is going on? But he's got freaking 18 assists, something crazy like that. So it's even when he's not scoring, he impacts every single possession. So whether you decide to let him have single coverage, go one-on-one, and that's the thing, he's such a great passer. If you double team him, when you do it, it has to be so quick and it has to be aggressive. You can't kind of, go half effort. You can't, you got to, if you make the decision to trap him, you got to go immediately. It can't be a hesitation because he's waiting for it. If he sees it coming, then he sees where the pass is going to go. You got to go so quickly that he's still searching for what's the best pass. So we'll see what they do, but I imagine it's going to be more like what we've seen instead of going the opposite way of saying, okay, like we're going to let you go single coverage and get yours. So who knows?
Yeah. And then
why I do this job, and I talk about what happens during the game.
Right.
I don't have to make the game plan.
Yeah, you get to react to what you see, and hopefully you're going to see more good things, more Fox, more Sabonis. I like the way Keegan's been playing too lately. I think I'm so excited, Kayte, where his career is going. I know it's a long way to go, but his defense is really tremendous, and his offensive game will just keep getting refined. And I just love everything about Keegan right now.
Keegan's been fantastic. I think the one thing at this point in the season that you've got to realize is that it's important for him to continue to maintain his aggression, right? In terms of offensively. And there's some games where he has, he maybe misses a couple shots early, and you don't see him look for his shot as much. So I think for this team to be successful, that's starting five. They all have to be aggressive. But then it's like, what's the thing is like, okay, you pick out matchups in the beginning of the game of who is, who's going to have the best matchup in terms of the defender for the other team, right? Harrison Barnes, a lot of the times they've figured out here over the last month and a half or so, it's like they want to try and isolate that defender because, he might have the worst defender on him to start the game. And it doesn't mean that the defender's terrible. It's just of the five, So how do you kind of ISO different matchups to be successful? But yeah, Keegan, to me, it's just to see his growth. Defensively, he's been so great, and offensively, we know what he's capable of. Jason, are you hearing them in the control room, or is it just me?
No, I guess it's just you. That's weird.
Yeah, I'm hearing both of them. It's Simone, right? And
yeah.
Chris.
That's funny.
I'm like trying to focus, but I'm hearing their whole conversation.
That's so weird. I don't know. We got the bugs in there for some reason. Well, good for you. That's like a TV producer talking in your ear. You're trained.
But the point to Keegan, to the point on Keegan, is his growth has been great, but we need to see it. I think personally, you need to see his offensive game kind of be a little bit more consistent and look for him to be a little bit more aggressive. He was brilliant in the first half. He had 15 points, couldn't miss a shot. And then I was like, God, they're not going to him as much in the second half. And it's like, was it an adjustment for Miami, or is it just, you kind of have the break for halftime, and then you're like, okay, he's kind of cooled down a little bit. You don't really know, but I would like to see him be a little bit more consistent on the offensive end.
Yeah. Well, we all do. Kayte, good work there. You're just staying the pro right through that. I don't know. I didn't hear any of it. So good for you. Have a great call tonight. Certainly a good trip here to Denver and to Minnesota, and we'll talk to you again next week.
All right. Take care, y'all.
All right. Thank you. Kayte Christensen. I don't know what was happening there, but we appreciate her checking in as always. Always love to have our conversations with Kayte each